He didn't deserve to go through this. He didn't deserve to be crushed by the cruelty of a system that treated him as if he were less than human. Why so much evil? Why so much brutality? What did he do, other than fight for his own dignity? Malcolm X wasn't a monster. He wasn't a threat, he was the answer. And the answer is always feared by those who prefer ignorance to the awakening of consciousness. The truth that Malcolm X brought wasn't just uncomfortable, it was destructive. He wasn't afraid to look the powerful in the eyes and tell them the truth, that the history they told was a lie. And more than that, he had the courage to tear that lie apart, one word at a time. They hated him not because he was violent, but because he showed the reflection of the violence they tried to hide. Their hatred wasn't in Malcolm's words, it was in the raw, naked reality he refused to let be forgotten. And that was the real threat. The truth he spoke with fiery passion and a penetrating gaze that left everyone around him breathless. But the question that remains is, why was someone like him, with so much light and so much strength, treated with such cruelty? Malcolm was not just a man. He was the manifestation of something they feared. He was the awakening of an oppressed race, a cry for freedom that could not be silenced. He was the embodiment of everything the system wanted to keep hidden in the shadows. And they knew that as long as he was alive, the flame of revolution would never die. And that's why they hated him. Because he had the power to turn pain into strength. He had the power to make people finally start asking themselves, what if everything we were told was a lie? Now take a deep breath. Malcolm X's story is not just the story of one man. It is the story of a struggle, of a resistance against everything they tried to make disappear. And the truth he brought will never die. They didn't hate him just for his words. They hated him for the silence he broke. They hated him because, in a country built on lies, Malcolm X dared to tell the truth with eyes on fire and a soul at peace. He challenged everything. The system, the media, history, the very idea of submission. He was the living proof that black consciousness was not only possible, it was inevitable. And that, they couldn't allow. While other leaders bowed with diplomacy, Malcolm stood with fire. While the newspapers called him an extremist, he simply held up the mirror. I'm not violent. I'm the reflection of the violence you pretend not to see. Every word that left his mouth was a deep cut into the American myth. And the more he spoke, the more people woke up. But before we continue this story, they tried to erase from the books. Warning, you are watching content that could change the way you see history. If this truth has already sent shivers down your spine in the first few seconds, subscribe now. Here we give voice to those they tried to silence. And the algorithm hates that. So help this message survive. Now, take a deep breath. Let's get to what really happened. He wasn't born Malcolm X. He was born Malcolm Little. In 1925, in an America that smiled with white teeth while keeping the whip behind its back. His father, Earl Little, was a Christian minister and activist of the UNIA, the Universal Negro Improvement Association, founded by Marcus Garvey. Someone who understood, long before others, that the American dream wasn't made for everyone. Earl spoke loudly without fear. And that's why he was silenced. They said it was an accident. A streetcar ran over him and split his body in two. But the tracks of white hate were everywhere. The police ignored it. Justice closed its eyes. And the widow, Louise Little, slowly fell into a mental collapse. The collapse of a black woman trying to raise her children amidst the state's disdain. Little by little, the system took everything from Malcolm. His father, his mother, his home, the ground. They threw him into foster care. Then into another. Then into yet another. Every white adult around him repeated the same refrain. You speak well for a black boy. You should be a carpenter, something realistic. You'll never be a lawyer, stop dreaming. But Malcolm dreamed. And that scared them. At 15 he dropped out of school. At 16 he entered the world of crime. He wasn't a criminal. He was a young man trying to exist where being black was already considered a crime. He stole, he cheated, he survived. Until he was arrested, convicted, and thrown into a cold cell, the place where many give up. But there he didn't die. There he awoke. It was in prison that he encountered the teachings of the Nation of Islam. It was there he met Elijah Muhammad. And most importantly, it was there that he met himself. Prison didn't break him. The system failed. Because Malcolm came out of there stronger than ever. More conscious. More dangerous. He stopped straightening his hair, a silent symbol of decolonization. He rejected the surname Little, the name of the slave owner who likely christened his ancestors. And he adopted the X. The X was his weapon, his scar, his cry. The X was everything the whites had stolen from him. Name, history, past. And while others hid behind imposed surnames, Malcolm raised the X as a war flag. Back in society, he became the face of the Nation of Islam. Charismatic, unrefutable, intelligent, unyielding. He was a force of nature with a microphone in his hands. And wherever he spoke, the crowd stopped. In churches, on the streets, on television shows. But it wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. With penetrating eyes, with an unbreakable stance, with truth that cut like a razor. While others asked for equality, Malcolm demanded respect. While others believed in reform, he spoke of revolution. And he said, without hesitation, if anyone puts their hands on you, send them to the cemetery. For many, that was violence. But for those who lived with calloused knees and scarred backs, that was simply the right not to die in silence. Malcolm said he wasn't Christian, because he couldn't believe in a religion that taught to love the enemy but did nothing to protect black people. He said he wasn't American, because he couldn't pledge allegiance to a flag that burned crosses in its yards. He said the struggle wasn't for inclusion but for liberation. And all of that began to make him public enemy number one. They began to fear him when they realized that he wasn't just a speaker. He was an architect of consciousness. It wasn't enough to take down the man. They had to destroy the symbol. Malcolm X was no longer just a body, he was an idea. And ideas are more dangerous than bullets. The FBI knew this. The CIA knew this. The entire government knew. That's why they opened a file with hundreds of pages on him. That's why they surveilled him, listened in on him, followed him. Not because he was committing crimes, but because he was doing the unthinkable. He was waking up the zombies of an anesthetized America. He was saying, "You've been hypnotized. Wake up. Look around. You're in a modern-day plantation." While Martin Luther King preached peace, Malcolm preached preparation. While others marched with flowers, he taught how to carry thorns. And that made many black people look at themselves for the first time and think, "I'm not the problem. I'm the answer." But the most dangerous truth about Malcolm X was still to come. Because he didn't stagnate. He wasn't a man of statues. He evolved. And when he broke with the Nation of Islam, many thought he was finished. But in fact, that's when he began to disturb even more. Because Malcolm, now free from dogma, began to see something that few saw. The struggle wasn't just racial. It was spiritual. It was structural. It was global. He saw connections between blacks in Harlem and the oppressed in Africa. Between the American ghettos and the colonized fields. Between white apartheid and the silent self-hatred of blacks. He went to Mecca, made the pilgrimage, and there he saw Muslims of all colors praying together, crying together, loving together. That shattered his old beliefs that the white man was by nature the enemy. No, the true enemy was deeper. It was the system that taught a man to feel superior because of his color, and taught the other to feel inferior because of being born different. When he returned from his opened eyes, Malcolm was more dangerous than ever. Now he spoke of unity, of brotherhood, of reconciliation, yes, but with truth and not with submission. Now he denounced not only American segregation, but the hypocrisy of the Nation of Islam itself. And that made him lose allies and gain new enemies. He no longer belonged to any group. He was for all those who wanted freedom. But that was unforgivable. Because independent leaders are uncontrollable. And the system hates what it cannot control. The threats began. The anonymous calls. The ominous warnings. They said he was betraying the movement. That he was confused. That he was alone. But the truth is, Malcolm was never clearer. Never more firm. Never closer to becoming what they feared most. The bridge between blacks in the ghettos and African brothers. Between aimless youth and the revolutionary strength of awakening. He founded the Afro-American Unity Organization. Started visiting countries in Africa, speaking at the UN, doing what no one expected. Internationalizing the black cause. And when a black man from the United States denounces a global empire of oppression, it sends a message. The system understood that. The elites understood that. And they knew exactly how to deal with him. Malcolm was saying that the United States was committing crimes against humanity, not just discrimination. Crimes. He was saying that African Americans had the right to defend themselves, not just to integrate. That they had the right to exist as a free people, not just as a tolerated minority. And at that point he went from being a nuisance to a threat. A real threat. Not just to the racial status quo, but to the entire project of a democratic America. Because if the world heard Malcolm, the empire would begin to crumble from within. But before we finish this part of the story, they tried to silence behind the scenes of the media. A warning, this is not a biography. It's a cry that survived. If you felt that, share it. Comment. Subscribe. Because the more people wake up, the harder it will be to fall asleep again. Now take a deep breath. The story continues. Malcolm X's last months of life were not silent. They were a roar. A final cry from someone who knew, with the clarity of someone reading between the lines of death, that his time was running out. He could feel it. Every step was a risk. Every word a sentence. But he didn't back down. Malcolm began speaking with an urgency that burned. He was no longer the young man from prison, nor the minister of the Nation of Islam. He was a man who had seen the world, and seen that the struggle was much bigger than a color, a country, or a religion. It was a war for dignity. And that's why they hated him even more. Because now Malcolm didn't divide, he united. Not just African Americans but also Latinos, Native Americans, Asians, poor whites, exploited workers, college students, single mothers. He spoke to everyone who carried on their backs the weight of a system built to drain, punish, and discard. Malcolm X began building unlikely alliances. He reached out to leaders with whom he had previously disagreed. He conversed with intellectuals, artists, militants. He founded schools, created awareness programs. He denounced police brutality as state policy. He questioned the role of the media as a tool of psychological domination. But what scared them the most was the idea growing behind his speeches. The oppressed could unite. It wasn't just a racial issue. It was a power issue. And Malcolm was showing where this power could be found. In the union of the marginalized, in political education, in self-organization, in the refusal to accept scraps. The FBI no longer hid its concern. In internal documents, they called Malcolm one of the most dangerous men in America. Not because he was inciting rebellions, but because he was arming minds. And when minds are armed, chains fall. It was in this scenario that the attacks began. First, the slanders. Malcolm is lost. Malcolm betrayed his religion. Malcolm went crazy. Then the death threats, the constant surveillance, the sinister phone calls in the middle of the night. Until, in February 1965, his house was bombed, with his wife and daughters inside. He survived. But he understood, the clock was ticking. Even so, on February 21st, he went up to the stage at the Audubon Ballroom in New York. He was with his wife Betty and his daughters in the audience. He was vulnerable. He knew it. But the mission spoke louder. When the shots came, they were not just against a body, they were against a truth that the system no longer wanted to hear. They were against a story that was about to be told by those who had always been silenced. They were against the possibility that a people would wake up and decide not to ask for space anymore, but to take their place by right. Malcolm X fell. But his voice was never silenced again. He had said, "When I die, it will be because I was faithful to what I believe. I didn't sell my soul. I didn't bow my head. I didn't hide behind excuses." And he fulfilled it. He died standing. Malcolm's funeral attracted thousands. But the cameras were more interested in painting his death as the end of an extremist, rather than the sacrifice of a visionary. They tried again to extinguish his flame. They tried to divide his image. They tried to rewrite his story as if it were an isolated chapter, with no heritage, no seed, no legacy. But they failed. Because today, the name Malcolm X echoes in the cries for justice that will not be silenced. It echoes in the streets where young people march with clenched fists. It echoes in the eyes of every person who, when looking in the mirror, decides they will no longer accept the role of supporting actor in their own life. And the real reason they hated him was never about what he did. It was about what he awakened inside of us. Malcolm X was the storm that comes after centuries of silence. And what the system fears the most is that this storm never passes. If this story touched something in you, share it. Comment, subscribe. Because the more they try to erase these memories, the louder we need to scream, "He lives."